The Sign of the Ram is an okay film. There are some strong moments here and some good character writing and good performances, but I do think the backstory is more interesting than the film itself, and I am willing to admit that I probably would have liked it less had I no context. This was released in 1948. It's directed by John Sturges, written by Charles Bennett, based on the novel by Margaret Ferguson, with a cast including Susan Peters, Alexander Knox, Phyllis Thaxter, Peggy Garner, and various others. And Susan Peters plays our protagonist Leah, and Leah is, well, she has a hold over her family. She's got some questionable attitudes, and it's about her relationship with her family, their reactions to her, and just how much things might escalate. The specifics of the narrative are not that interesting. I didn't really care for it as it developed, but the character writing is very strong. And there's something that is important to note, and that's the fact that Susan Peters is in a wheelchair. Her character is in a wheelchair, and I actually wanted to watch this because I wish I could remember which book it was in. I read a lot about classic Hollywood, but I read in a book about Susan Peters' accident. I won't go into too much detail in case you want to do your own background reading, but there was an accident involving a gun, and she became paralysed because of the injury to her spine. And she was in a wheelchair for years, and of course that's going to negatively affect her career as an actress. But then she realised that she could play roles in a wheelchair, and she wanted to play, according to the book that I read, she wanted to play this very strong and perhaps morally questionable character. And this is kind of how this role came about. And I won't say too much more about Susan Peters' life after the film, or indeed her career after the film, but it is worth reading into. It's heartbreaking. It really, really is. And having all of that background information gave me a different experience when I was watching her performance, knowing what she had been through to get to that point, knowing what had led Susan Peters to then play this protagonist in a wheelchair, was a much stronger and certainly more emotional experience than I ever would have received from this film had I just watched it randomly. And obviously there's always the question of, do you need background information to enjoy the film? And I pretty much every time will say no. A film should be able to stand on its own without the viewer requiring any background knowledge. I think I pretty much, I'm firm on that one. There might be exceptions, but generally speaking. And the narrative just isn't that interesting. The characters are, they definitely are. They do help to make it a bit more fascinating. Not just Leah, the other characters as well. And the performances are all really, really good. And there are a couple of scenes in the film that are quite powerful. But at the same time, there are scenes that I think could have been a little bit stronger. I think scenes could have been a little bit more moving, a little bit more powerful. So it did deliver. I don't think it quite met its potential. But there were definitely times when it also felt quite slow, a little bit bland, not that fascinating. There were some scenes, though, that were quite atmospheric and quite moving. So it kind of almost balances out. There's some good music, decent camera work, good costumes, good sets, good locations. All of that works really well. It's just simply a narrative that's not that strong, but the characters are very strong. The performances are great, but the backstory makes this significantly more moving than I think it otherwise would have been. So I do recommend it if you're interested in the backstory, in Susan Peters' life and what she went through. I think you'll find that it makes it quite a moving experience at times. If you're not that bothered about the backstory and you're just looking for a good film, maybe give it a go. Maybe, I wouldn't say as background company. I do think because of the strength of the character writing, I feel like spending time with them and getting to know them is worthwhile. So I'd say becoming immersed in it because of the characters, I think there's value in that. If you're curious, check it out. If you're not that bothered, I don't think you're missing out on much. But certainly, Susan Peters' story is one that I'd say is definitely worth looking into.